Hello and welcome. My name is Merlin and I'm here to talk a bit about the SEGA CD and my favorite games for this quirky little add-on. In 1991, halfway through the life of the Sega Genesis, the SEGA CD, also known as the Mega CD, was released in Japan. As one of the first video game systems to make use of CD-ROMs, it acted as an add-on for the pre-existing console and was considered a commercial failure given its reputation and market performance. Promotional advertisements primarily focused on full-motion video games that, while high-tech, were not received well, and the technology was lacking in power to make many of the games enticing enough despite their high production values.
Hey! You still don't have a Sega CD? What are you waiting for, Nintendo to make one? You have seen the games, right? Wrong answer, man. Show 'em!
Personally, I have no nostalgia with the Sega CD, nor have I ever encountered one in real life. My first ever experience with CD games and, well, video games in general, was the Dreamcast and PlayStation with games like Sonic Adventure, Tekken 3, and Spyro the Dragon. I've never heard anyone make this comparison before, but the Sega CD reminds me a lot of the Game Boy Color. Both are hardware extensions of older consoles and through a new format gave some classics a new lease on life by way of re-release or sequels, such as Link's Awakening to Link's Awakening DX and Final Fight to Final Fight CD, both of which are the definitive editions of said games. Both systems, however, also had their issues. The Sega CD's poor commercial performance prevented a lot of games from coming to it, like Sonic the Hedgehog 2 CD, Disney's Aladdin, and Phantasy Star 4, while the Game Boy Color, on the other hand, lacked a backlit screen, and its cancelled games often suffered through development issues like the infamous Resident Evil port or the mysterious Metroid 2 DX. In this video, I want to share my top 20 Sega CD games of all time. The making and ranking of this list is composed of my opinions. There are no honorable mentions, and please know that there might be spoilers depending on the game. The methodology of my ranking is based on the game's lasting effect upon me and/or its fun and replayability. I tend to like imported games, but given the lack of support for the add-on in the fan translation community, this list only has a single import game. I mean, I'm still holding out hope that someday we get fan translations of the games on screen, especially after Armageddon Gaiden, as it was a JRPG with an active-time battle system in the vein of Final Fantasy, however it used demons and monsters as opposed to humans. It was supposed to be localized by Working Designs back in the day, but it was unfortunately cancelled due to the failure of the Sega CD. Shin Megami Tensei 1 also released in Japan on the Mega CD, and while it is playable nowadays in a variety of ways, I admit I have an affinity for weird ports. Don't ask why. Nevertheless, had I been able to play any of these depicted, I'm confident they would have affected the outcome of this list. Without further ado, let's start off with number 20, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Often dubbed as a sort of test of software for the Sega CD, Panic features a boy called Slap and his dog Stick. Together, they press buttons in their path in order to locate and eradicate a virus that has infected every machine in the world. However, due to this virus, the buttons can cause any effects, such as warping the one who presses them to anywhere in the world. Only the correct button path can lead Slap and Stick to the heart of the computer virus. Very few switches can set off chain reactions to destroy historical monuments. If you end up destroying all of the historical monuments, it results in a game over. I admit, despite its strange, dreamlike nature, Panic is a lot of fun, and seeing where each button takes you is always intriguing. My only complaint is that previously pressed buttons aren't marked unless it destroys a monument, so you can end up going around in circles, as some buttons warp you to previous locations or even cause a game over, making you start all over again. That said, the game over scenes are very silly and fun to watch, just like everything in the game.
You're not meant for this game. Goodbye! Obviously, you're not meant for this game either. Goodbye!
Panic is a game everyone should try in my opinion, whether or not you're interested in the Sega CD. I'm a little surprised that this wasn't released earlier as a packing game, as it would have made a great app to mess around with. There are a lot of shooters on the Sega CD, FMV or otherwise. We have Robo Aleste, which was good but not too memorable aside from the cutscenes. Thunderstrike, a cool arcadey spectacle that was way more in-depth than some might think. Starblade, one of the first ever 3D games that was way better on Tekken 5 admittedly. And even Soulstar, an impressive Star Fox-like game that showcases the power of the Sega CD compared to the Genesis. I've played many old-school shooters, and while I like a good deal of them, over the years I've found that a majority can be rather samey, but there's one subgenre of shooter that I never tire of, and that is shoot-'em-ups. KO Flying Squadron, or KO Yugeki Tai, released in 1994 by Victor Entertainment, is a shoot-'em-up for the Sega CD. I don't know what it is, but shoot-'em-ups often provide enough variety to keep me invested, whether it's the visuals, weapons, or the often goofy stories. In fact, Parodius from Myth to Laughter on TurboGrafx 16 is one of my favorite shooters of all time, but I digress. Anyway, the game is set in the Keio area during the Edo period of Japanese history. I have to admit, prior to even writing this script, I barely knew much about the story, and I had kind of just assumed that Keio was the name of the girl. However, her name is Rami, and she's a teenage girl who is the keeper of the key to the secret treasure. While out at the local mini-mart with her grandmother, the key was stolen, and now Rami must go on an adventure to retrieve the key. The story is not too deep, but this one has really great artwork and good music and voice work. There's not too many fun power-ups, and some segments just have you waiting for what feels like a long time while the screen scrolls. But it's a really good one, although it's definitely not worth the $1,000 it sells for on eBay. I say put it in a collection with other Sega CD, Sega Saturn, and Turbo CD shooters along with its sequel and re-release it for modern consoles. That would be a very nice collection I would actually buy. So, there I was, casually making my way down Sega CD Lane, hoping to get in on some Dragon's Lair and Space Ace, but unfortunately, the Sega CD versions don't have defined button prompts. Like, why? Some random object just lights up on the screen and the player has to guess a button, and that's not very fun. Throughout my retro gaming career, as it were, I've heard much about Dragon's Lair and how it's supposedly a classic, but this Sega CD port is definitely not it. Maybe these FMV games aren't all they're cracked up to be. I mean, isn't it supposed to be the future of gaming? There should be at least one fun bout into the world of grainy QuickTime events. And there is one, surprisingly enough.
Revenge of the Ninja.
Also known as Ninja Hayate. You know, I almost passed this game up thinking it was kind of boring in the beginning, but as I progressed through each stage, I started to really feel the thrill of being on the edge of my seat wondering when the next button prompt would come up, as well as seeing what hijinks Hayate would get himself into and how he'd get out of it. It's a really fun game to play at least once. I played it on the easiest difficulty, but it's definitely worth trying these games on a harder setting too. Overall, it's a good game with great animation and is a worthwhile gateway into the world of FMV.
Okay, you're coming to your first turn.
Oh no, the first turn. Please tell me you know what to do at the first turn.
Left,
Oh!
right.
Oh! My, this is splendid, SpongeBob. You're doing fine.
Heart of the Alien Out of This World Parts 1 and 2, released in 1994, is a duology consisting of the cinematic platformers Another World and Heart of the Alien. Another World is a game originating from the Amiga computer, and Heart of the Alien is the SEGA CD exclusive unofficial sequel to Another World. At first, I didn't really like Another World, but it grew on me with its scenery and cinematic storytelling. A major gripe I have with the game is the combat. It gets really tedious and almost begins to feel kind of luck-based because you just kind of have to put up shields and hope you get a good shot in on the enemies. There's also some obscure stuff that doesn't really make any sense, like this dropping bombs down to another screen thing. I have no clue how I was supposed to figure that out on my own without a walkthrough. Admittedly, my placing this game this low on the list is mostly due to the difficulty and the more puzzly nature of Heart of the Alien 2. So much so that I didn't even finish the second half and just looked up the ending on YouTube. The ending of the first game was fantastic, and the sequels was good too. It was really sad. I only wish the gameplay in Heart of the Alien was more refined than the first one, rather than it being more puzzly and obstacle-based. I highly suggest playing both games yourself because words do not do Another World justice. You really have to play it to appreciate it. Despite my complaints, this is still one of the best experiences on the SEGA CD, especially for Another World, as this is the only port that has a soundtrack of any kind, and said soundtrack definitely adds to the ambience, especially if you're more familiar with the silent versions of the game. As a rule of thumb, SEGA CD enhanced or exclusive soundtracks are often remarkable. Fun fact, this is one of the 5 games that inspired Hideo Kojima when creating Metal Gear Solid. Another World is a fascinating part of gaming history that has inspired many games since. It recently had a re-release on PlayStation Vita as well as other consoles, and I definitely see myself playing it again someday. This is hands down the best version of Pitfall: The Mayan Adventure. I originally played it on Sega 32X, and at first I thought that maybe this port wasn't worth my time because both the 32X and CD versions have the extra levels, but I was dead wrong on that assumption. The 32X version runs at 30 frames per second, while the CD port runs at a smooth 60 FPS. It has a greatly enhanced CD soundtrack and darker, more atmospheric colors. On top of all that, all of the animations are silky smooth and the game actually controls really well. Or at least, as well as Pitfall can control. I've never played the original Pitfall, but it's a really nice touch that the main character of this game is the son of the previous hero. I like this game quite a lot, and I think the graphics are very good, but I don't see myself playing this game again as it's quite difficult and it's kind of a one and done deal, even though I played through the game twice, but whatever, you know what I mean. The bosses can be brutal until you learn their patterns, and some of the platforming can be a tad difficult too. By the way, speaking of having not played Pitfall, you can also find the original game in a hidden spot on one of the levels. I never found it, and I beat the game twice before I knew this fact, but that's still pretty amazing. There's people who say that the Windows 95 version is the best for its brighter colors, but in my opinion this one is the definitive version because the darker colors make for a more immersive adventure into the wild. The darker colors combined with the 60 FPS really enhance the atmosphere. Plus, look at this impressive sprite work on this fire. Like, I know it's just fire and like there's definitely better sprite work done in say like PS1 or PS2 games, but this is not something I thought I'd see in Pitfall. The Sega CD certainly wasn't shy of mascot platformers with characters like Radical Rex and Wonder Dog, but unfortunately not too many of them were all that good. In 1995, the add-on was blessed with the definitive edition of the 16-bit hit
Special Edition.
In this version, we of course get a great CD quality soundtrack, some of the levels got extended, there's also an entirely new level, and over 1,000 more frames of animation to better illustrate this wacky alien world. Personally, I don't have any nostalgia for this game as I was born 4 years after this game's release. This is my first entry into the Earthworm Jim series, and while I found the bosses to be difficult, they were always a good challenge and the platforming is a lot of fun. I thought the glass ball underwater section was rather excruciating because of learning how to control it. It honestly reminded me a lot of the ball levels from Crash Wrath of Cortex or basically any Crash underwater stage. My favorite part of the game was just exploring the levels and looking at the scenery because a lot of the sprite work is phenomenal and of course using the machine gun is a lot of fun. Overall, it's one of the best experiences on the Sega CD and is highly recommended. Alright, of course there needs to be at least one bad or quote acquired taste game on everyone's Sega CD list, right? For some that's Sewer Shark, Night Trap, Nova Storm, even Double Switch. To be honest, I really wanted to like Double Switch as well, but the nature of the game doesn't allow you to enjoy the story because of how fast you have to trap the bad guys. You can't just watch the cutscenes unless you either don't know how to play, or are simply trying to get a game over.
You let those suckers get to the power box, and now we're all cut off.
The best thing about Double Switch is obviously the crazy amazing Tunnel Vision song. Look in the description or at the screen right now and go to Sega CD Universe's video for a cover of that song. It's just so good. But anyway, we're getting off topic. So what's my acquired taste game? Well, that would be the super late release Wirehead. Yes, really. I know the cover just screams 90s B-movie, but hear me out, it's a good one. Wirehead is a full-motion video game that tells the story of a man called Ned Hubbard who, after suffering a head injury, was saved by having an antenna-like wire put into his head, and you, as the player, must guide him to safety through making him take different directions in his path, and sometimes even fight. There are mysterious figures out to kidnap Ned and harness the technology within him for fascist purposes. Unlike Double Switch, the story-focused nature of the game allows you to take in all of the cutscenes. I admit the trial and error needed to progress can be a little annoying, but this game's story is very engaging and fun. Even the death scenes are pretty funny or novel, and feature dialogue you otherwise wouldn't hear. The story and action was honestly so captivating that I don't want to spoil it, so definitely try it out. Prince of Persia, released in 1992. This was my first ever experience with Prince of Persia. When I first tried this game, I hated the controls, and while I think that the prince shouldn't move forward when you jump in place, as that has caused me many a death, playing through the game showed me that the controls are the way they are so that you can make extra precise movements and plan out each action upon entering the map. The controls are admittedly a bit laggy and the levels can be extremely difficult, but you get used to it over time. Of course, we have to address the elephant in the room. The cutscenes are silly and dumb given only the characters' mouths move, and it's not in any way lip sync or trying to be timed with the mouth movements, but the scenes are really colorful and I kinda like the idea of an anime style Prince of Persia. Not that it would ever happen, but seeing a Prince of Persia game with animation by Toei or Funimation back in the day would have been really neat. Along with laggy, I mean artistically designed controls, you have the option to alter the speed of movement and the overall gameplay to best fit your temperament, which is a quality that no other version has. This port also has equally thematic background music to accompany your ascension of the dungeon. At first, I thought the combat was dumb and uninteresting, but it can get quite heated in a lot of instances, and it requires you to always be paying attention as you can often use the environment around you to your advantage. I have a lot of respect for this title and its intentions with the controls and the storied history behind the game's creation. A lot of the history behind it with Jordan Mechner is unbelievably fascinating. I suggest checking out his YouTube channel shown on the screen for more information on this platforming classic. Although many people consider the SNES version to be the best, which, while I haven't played it, and I don't doubt that claim, the SEGA CD version is definitely worth looking into. With the exception of Sands of Time in my backlog, I was never really interested in Prince of Persia, but now I'm happy to say that this game has made me completely invested in the franchise. So when I said there'd be one import game, it's a PC port of a SEGA CD game, given that that was the only way I could play it in English, but nevertheless, aside from some color palette changes, they're virtually the same game. And that game is Urusei Yatsura, Dear My Friends, also known as Those Obnoxious Aliens, My Dear Friends. This is a very humorous and relaxing point-and-click adventure game brought to us in 1994 by Game Arts. The game, based on the manga and anime of the same name, tells the story of a man called Aratu and the alien Lum. Aratu seeks to go girl hunting on a daily basis, but Lum, who believes herself to be his wife, often tries to stop him. One day, however, the couple encounters a young girl seemingly from out of nowhere who claims to have lost her pendant. From that point on, all kinds of wacky, mythical antics ensue. The game overall is a hilarious round of twists and turns that keep you laughing and anticipating the whole way. I will rather not spoil anything because the game is mostly story, but the cutscenes are really high quality even today. My favorite character was Ten. I thought him reading in the beginning of the game and yelling about his video games was really funny, and finding him worn out playing Dead in the Park was also quite hilarious. Anyway, as I said already, this game is very interesting and can be finished in about 2 hours. I suggest anyone try out the game because it's a fun time and the dialogue is fantastic. Vi, also known as Vi Ryusei no Yoroi or Vi Meteor Armor, was released in 1994 by Working Designs and was the first SEGA CD RPG I ever played. While the visuals are simple and maybe even a bit archaic, this is a really good JRPG with great dialogue. The game's story tells of an alien machine falling from the sky and wreaking havoc on the Earth. The world almost succumbed to its unknown power, that is, until 5 wizards sealed the machine and its power into 5 magical orbs. Afterwards, they sealed the orbs away into faraway places so that the machine may never again awaken. I would rather not spoil any more of the story as it's super interesting and features many memorable moments, so go play it. One of my favorite things about the game is that party members come and go, a lot like Grandia and Final Fantasy II, which gives the world a real sense of seriousness and believability. I played the Unworking Designs patch, which fixes some of the technical changes that causes the player to grind more. That said, there is still a lot of grinding. Speaking about grinding, the battle theme can become kind of tiring, but the world map theme, on the other hand, I never tire of. And it always gave me that sense of being out in the open world on a journey of unimaginable twists, turns, and challenges. Other than being in limited supply, it doesn't make too much sense to me as to why this game costs so much physically. I mean, it's good fun, but it doesn't have any replay value. Despite that, I highly recommend it to anyone who likes classic, old-school, retro JRPGs. Unfortunately, being on SEGA CD though, it won't reach many people. Yes, it does have the rather dated and somewhat enhanced port on iPhones, but this game would do well to get a modern HD sprite remake and even a sequel. Here we are, the top 10, starting off with the 1994 release Mickey Mania: The Timeless Adventures of Mickey Mouse. Right off the bat, I have to say that this is an extremely beautiful game. All of the backgrounds and character sprites have so much detail. The game essentially features Mickey journeying through time to re-experience his old adventures. The gameplay is solid, if not a bit difficult at times. Many of the levels test your platforming skills and require you to take your time. Contemporary reviews of Mickey Mania refer to it being for kids, but I assume they didn't play it past the first level because this game is Castlevania levels of challenging. The game originally released on Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, but the Sega CD version has enhanced sprites and added level and voice tracks from Mickey himself. There's also a PlayStation 1 port called Mickey's Wild Adventure that further enhances the sprites and adds more little nuances to the game too. Mickey Mania 2 was intended for release, but was scrapped in favor of Toy Story. I like Toy Story, but I wish we could have gotten more Mickey Mania titles in order to see the graphics develop even further. Imagine Mickey Mania 3 or 4 on Castlevania Symphony of the Night levels of sprite detail and animation. That would be a dream. Not only is the sprite work impressive, the Mega CD box art is also the best cover for the game. Very colorful and detailed compared to the box art of other ports. Mickey Mania also made history, being the first ever game to feature a character running towards the screen in a 3D level. I had initially thought that Crash Bandicoot was first, but no, Mickey Mania did it almost 2 years earlier. There's so much more impressive and historical work done in this game. Check out Coding Secrets and Game Huts videos shown on the screen and in the description to hear more straight from one of the developers. Overall, this is one of the best platformers for the system, and I recommend this game to anyone who even likes video games. It's that good. Here is perhaps the best FMV game on the system, Road Avenger, also known as Road Blaster, Road Blaster FX, or Road Prosecutor, depending on which version of the game you're playing and in what part of the world you're playing it to. This is the first FMV game I ever tried, and initially I didn't like it one bit. I thought the controls weren't very responsive, but it turned out my controller wasn't working right. But I decided to go back to it because listening to GameSack Joe's opinion on the game made me want to give it a second chance. Turns out, this game actually controls extremely well, is loads of fun, and the action scenes really make the experience. A new driving simulator or action RPG sequel would be very nice. This is a fantastic but short adventure that really makes you feel like you're driving a car. The game's story concerns a vigilante who, while on his honeymoon, his wife was killed by a crime boss, and so, against all odds, he hops on the road to avenge his beloved. With great visuals, the adventure really puts you on the edge of your car seat at moments. GameSack Joe was right, this is probably the best FMV game of all time. Either my controller was messed up, or by the time I played it again, I had become accustomed to FMV games. Seriously, if you play only one FMV game in your life, this should be it. Time Gal or Time Mugaru, developed by Wolf Team, released in 1993, and I'll just say it, this is my favorite FMV game hands down. I admit, Wirehead's story was great, Revenge of the Ninja was a really fun sort of gateway into FMV games, or at least into liking FMV games, and Road Avenger really made me feel on edge. But Time Gal, in my opinion, has the best visuals, and at least in my experience, was often lenient with the time required during QuickTime events. Time Gal was inspired by the success of popular pre-recorded animation games at the time like Dragon's Lair. Starring a girl named Reiko, she travels through time in order to stop a criminal from her era by the name of Luda who seeks to alter the past. The story isn't too deep, but the wacky adventures and fun visuals like Reiko turning into a doll to represent being killed, and all the captivating close calls more than make up for it. The thrill of each scene always gave me a sense of urgency, like I truly was running through time and hell, even out of time. Never getting to rest for more than a minute, such as when in the heat of the moment, the player, or Reiko more accurately, must make a quick decision between 3 possible options. Game overs in these full-motion video games can be quite annoying, but an amusing theme amongst many of them is that when you lose, you're often greeted to a gruesome, funny, or even weird death scene. My favorite thing about the game is that each playthrough is different. There are 16 stages, and 15 of them will always be played in a random order, which can make the game fun to replay. It would be nice if the story was more involved, but nevertheless, it is still my favorite FMV game of all time, and I highly suggest it for the visuals alone. Originally an arcade game, Time Gal was also ported to a variety of Japanese consoles and computers. However, SEGA CD was its only English release. Given that Time Gal unfortunately remains trapped on SEGA CD, it's likely we'll never really see a re-release for it. So go play it and show this great game some love. Lords of Thunder, also known as Winds of Thunder, is perhaps my favorite shooter on the TurboGrafx CD and the SEGA CD, as this port holds up surprisingly well. Originally released in 1993, this port was brought out in 1995 for SEGA CD. The soundtrack is amazing and has a very metal, old-school anime feel. Unlike most shooters wherein you pilot a ship, Lords of Thunder features a knight as the main character donning different elemental armors. I appreciate that you don't just pick one suit of armor to pilot for the whole game, a lot like other shooters. To mix up the experience, you can switch between 4 different armors before each level: water, earth, fire, and wind, each of which has their own special powers. Plus, the game having a health bar and shields is what makes it have a lasting appeal to me, because dying in one hit is okay in games like Crash Bandicoot, but it's often so demoralizing to me in shooters, especially when you respawn with none of your weapons. Without a doubt, this is one of the best shoot-em-ups of all time. I played this port on the hardest mode, and I actually found it to be kind of easy with the exception of some bosses. The TurboGrafx CD version has some additional qualities that make it better and is not as easy. I recommend the TurboGrafx CD port, but if you like the game that much, I suggest playing both. If you're interested in knowing the differences between them, click on the video shown on screen by Shmup Junkie. Anyway, this is perhaps the only shooter I'd recommend to even people who don't like these kinds of games. It's loads of fun, and you don't die in one hit for no reason, nor can you die from touching the environment unlike many other games in the genre. This might be controversial because of Soulstar's existence, but even though it's a port, I dare say Lords of Thunder is the best shooter on SEGA CD. Flashback, also known as Flashback: The Quest for Identity. I went into this game with really low expectations, as many of the screenshots you see online do not do it justice, but I ended up enjoying this game quite a lot. It's one of my favorite cinematic platformers now. I didn't believe I'd like this game more than Another World or Blackthorn when I played it on 32X, but it's quite the journey. Also, apparently there is more than one codec cube scene you can get, but I literally never checked it after the start of the game. Continuing on, there's a myriad of fantastic moments such as reading incredibly mysterious and ominous computer files, having to make money by completing certain odd jobs, working out of an alien prison, and even the ending. I really prefer not to spoil much, it's just that the journey of this game is so fun and there's so many different twists and turns. This game had a remake on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, simply titled Flashback. I have yet to try it, but it doesn't look too bad. Let me know if you've tried it though. Flashback does have a sequel called Fade to Black on PS1. It's not considered to be a good game, but I'm eager to try it. Along with this, Flashback Legends for GBA, another sequel, was cancelled, but the prototype can be found online. And finally, supposedly, Flashback 2 is scheduled to release this year. I doubt we'll see it, but I'll play it if it does. Anyway, no one really talks about it, but Flashback is one of the most successful games of all time too. The game was designed for the Genesis/Mega Drive, but the SEGA CD port is really fantastic too, and has voice acting for every NPC, 3D cutscenes, and a great CD soundtrack. I'm really happy I didn't pass it up. I don't have that much to say about the game, but it's just a really fun game. I'll definitely play it again on the Genesis so I can compare them, and maybe I'll make a really extensive video on that whenever it is that I play the Genesis version. But I really suggest checking it out, and I would say it's a very good entry-level cinematic platformer, because it's not really all that obscure in a lot of the things that you have to do. Yet another legendary sci-fi platformer from the publishers of Another World. Pop-for-Mail Magical Fantasy Adventure, also known as Pop-Puru-Miru, was released in 1995 by the legendary developers Falcom. Anyone who knows anything about the SEGA CD scene knows that Pop-for-Mail is one of the most refined and polished games for the add-on. I played the Unworking Designs patch, which, like Vi, fixes technical changes introduced by Working Designs to make the player grind more. Even so, yet again, just like Vi, the player will still want to grind for lots of gold. This game is absolutely fantastic. The visuals and characters are just brimming with life and color. However, in my opinion, some of the stages can be kinda tiringly difficult, such as the maze-like caves and the ice area. But overall, the game is beautiful, and the music is among the best the Sega Genesis CD and 32X combined have to offer. All of the scenes are dubbed very well thanks to Working Designs. Plus, one of the areas is called the Crystal Tower, and as a big Final Fantasy III fanatic, I was really happy about that. My favorite characters in the game were Male and Tat. Their dialogue was always pretty funny. As someone who likes to grind in JRPGs, I don't particularly like the game as much as other people do, mostly because you can only grind for money. The game's difficulty is dramatically increased due to losing massive amounts of damage from bosses. I honestly felt like a lot of the armor didn't help too much, but I could be wrong. And personally, I felt like Male, Tat, and Gaul moved way too close to the right side of the screen, often preventing you from being prepared against enemy attacks. This might sound a little confusing given this game is literally placed at number 5 in my list, but that just speaks to the overall quality of the game. It was honestly hard for me to decide which ranked higher, Flashback or Pop-for-Mail, but the humor in this game and the funny character interactions really do make the experience a lot of fun. Flashback shattered my expectations of a cinematic platformer, but Pop-for-Mail, despite its difficulty, was fun all around in both gameplay and its characters. The sound work and the cutscenes in the game are really impressive, and the gameplay is always fun despite my complaints. Working Designs, as always, did a fantastic job on the translation, and I found myself laughing out loud at many a scene. Originally, Pop-for-Mail was supposed to be a Sonic game called Sister Sonic, which would have been really nice, but this is better. Despite that, I still would like to see Sister Sonic maybe finally make Sonia from Sonic Underground canon. Okay, I'll stop. That was a great TV show though, and you know it. In the end, I wish there was some sort of moral being told in thoughtful mail to, kind of round out the story and give you something to think about or leave you feeling good. But overall, it's a game of superb quality that makes the Sega CD worth owning and being remembered. I recommend it to any Sega enthusiasts. There aren't that many strategy games on the Sega CD, and those that are weren't too appealing to me, like Dune. Yes, Dune, like Dune the novel, Powermonger, and Star Wars Chess. Dark Wizard was one of the few Japanese ones, but its micromanagement aspect and the battlefield visuals did not entice me, despite the somewhat interesting story and well-animated cutscenes though. Then, finally, Shining in the Darkness, I found it. One of the add-on's best RPGs. Shining Force CD, also known as Shining Force CD, brought to us in 1994 by
Sonic Software Planning.
This is a remake of 2 out of 3 Shining Force Gaiden games on the Sega Game Gear: Shining Force Gaiden Expedition to the Land of the Evil God, and Shining Force Gaiden 2, The Evil God Awakens. Shining Force CD labels these titles as Books 1 and 2, respectively. If you finish them and the completed saves are on the Sega CD's backup RAM cart, you will unlock a shorter third book called A New Challenge that grants a proper conclusion to the story. The game tells a story of a group of heroes called the Shining Force on a quest to save their queen from the clutches of evil. The story of Shining Force is really involved and at times convoluted. Similar to my other favorite strategy RPGs, Disgaea 2, Cursed Memories, Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn, and Final Fantasy Tactics, I found that many of the characters I chose to use really grew on me. By the end of each book's journey, I found myself looking back on battles thinking fondly of my very own Shining Force. However, unlike Final Fantasy Tactics, the gameplay is not very deep, and honestly, that gives it a breath of fresh air compared to most strategy games, at least in my opinion. Characters can class up upon reaching level 10, and others may possess a greater range of movement and physical attacks, but it's never more involved than that. Plus, it's not too difficult because in pretty much every battle, you can egress, which sends you back to camp to allow you to heal up, buy items or other such utilities. You can also abuse this feature to level grind if you're ever in a tough spot too. There is one thing that I disliked about the game, and that is Book 4, the Museum. Obtained through finding a secret item in Book 2 and clearing Book 3, this very underwhelming book is kind of like a boss rush. While that sounds fun, especially after your 3-chapter epic journey, it's really not worth it in my opinion. You can't choose your old team from the characters you experience the game with, the party is preset, and the battle is fairly luck-based too. Spoilers, but the battle isn't really canon because it all ends up being a dream and it's only one map with a bunch of bosses spread throughout. After about 2 or 3 failures on this map, I just watched the rest of it on YouTube because it's so unnecessarily difficult and pointless. Other than that last optional fight, I really enjoyed Shining Force CD way more than I expected. With the exception of playing the first Shining Force for a few minutes on Sonic's Ultimate Genesis collection, this is my first entry into the Shining series, and I have to say that I am hooked now. These games, while simple, are very fun and addicting. It's not overly complicated, and the stories and soundtracks are really good. I definitely recommend this game to any newcomers and those who love strategy RPGs. For some reason, I was dreading writing the script for this game. I mean, what is there to say about Sonic CD that hasn't been said? It's pretty much the best Sega CD game, although not my favorite. Both versions of the soundtrack are amazing, and it features the debut of one of my favorite Sonic characters, Metal Sonic. One thing I haven't heard anyone say, at least as of the making of this video, is that this year happens to be Sonic CD's 30th anniversary. Sonic CD really shows what the Sega CD was capable of in terms of music, sound, and especially graphics and background effects. Many of the special stages are downright mesmerizing. My first ever encounter with this game was as a kid through the Sonic Gems collection on the Nintendo GameCube. Back then I had no idea what a Sega CD was. To me this was just some Sonic game lost to time on quote one of those old Sega consoles. Prior to actually playing the game, however, Sonic Mega Collection is how I became aware of this game's existence because in the game's extras menu, you could watch the opening and ending sequence of Sonic CD. Back then, I thought it was clips from some sort of 90s Sonic anime. For the longest time, I thought the game was just okay and never really saw the appeal in it except for it being a retro classic. I especially never liked Wacky Workbench for those annoying floor springs. However, playing the game again, I tried it on PC with all the enhancements, and I have to say that this is one of the best 2D Sonic games there is, alongside Sonic 3 and Knuckles Chaotix. I used to not care for the time traveling aspect unless I wanted to change the music. I always felt that it interrupted the gameplay too much, but Sonic CD wants you to explore its levels and get all the achievements. That's the main fun of the game. Once you destroy the roboticizers and Metal Sonic holograms, going through the rest of the level you feel like a hero. Plus, exploring the levels allows you to really appreciate the music. Unfortunately, you can't obtain any achievements while playing with Tails. I mean, I guess that would be too easy, but in my opinion, the game is worth playing through twice in order to hear both the US and Japanese soundtracks. I played listening to the US soundtrack first and got all the achievements as Sonic, then did one final playthrough as Tails to take in the Japanese soundtrack. Speaking of Tails, I just love his 3D sprite in the special stages. It has so much detail. Overall, this is a fantastic time to be had on the Sega CD and is the add-on's killer app, if I do say so myself. Try it out on PC or home consoles or even Sonic Gems Collection for more achievements to be obtained, and take a look at all the amazing old artwork the game reveals when you complete certain requirements. It's beautiful. There's a long-held debate about which soundtrack is best, American or Japanese. As far as I can recall, Sonic Gems never allowed you to switch, and so I'm nostalgic for the US music, making that one my favorite, but the Japanese one is certainly amazing too. The game would benefit from an update that allows you to manually select each song to manifest as either Japanese or US to your liking. That said, we all know the Japanese victory theme is way better than the US one. Like, I mean, come on, it just screams Sega Saturn. Lunar Eternal Blue is one of the best games a Sega CD has to offer, and sadly, it didn't sell well. There's so much to say, I don't even know where to start. I admit I didn't really like the first Lunar, at least the Sega CD version. The gameplay was fine, the story was alright, there weren't too many memorable moments, at least in my opinion, and the music was just okay. It's not a bad game, but something about it just didn't click with me in the slightest, and so I was afraid that maybe I wouldn't like Eternal Blue. But no, I was so terribly wrong. Lunar Eternal Blue by Game Art, also known as Lunar 2 in its remake form, tells a captivating and grand story about a girl called Lucia, who has descended to the planet Lunar from the Blue Star to vanquish a terrible evil. You star as the adventurous, temple-raiding boy named Hero, who, when investigating an ancient tower, gets involved into a conflict that is well beyond his imagination. The story was leagues better, in my opinion, than Lunar 1, as there were quite a lot of moments that stood out to me. My favorite being when the character Jean joined, as well as seeing all the Lunar 1 characters reappear. I never heard anyone else say this before, but Jean looks an awful lot like Lynn from Fire Emblem 7. One of my favorite things about the game is that pretty much every villain except like 2 end up turning good in the end, which is kind of a twist from most video games in general. With the exception of Hero, who doesn't have much dialogue unfortunately, pretty much all the characters in the game are well written and quite likable. Moving on, the music in the game is absolutely stunning. I barely remember the music from the first game, but the battle theme from Lunar 2 is just so cool. I had it on repeat for days after I beat the game. Along with the music, the cutscenes and the audio is extremely well done. For being an old game of voice acting, the acting was actually pretty great in most scenes. I feel like the voice cast, especially Lucio, did a great job. All of the F&B scenes are beautifully animated, especially the ending ones. Even the UI of the game was infinitely better than Lunar 1's black boxes. The blue boxes and added descriptions were such quality of life improvements, much needed in Lunar 1. And, of course, I can't forget the dialogue, wonderfully done by Working Designs. They are geniuses when it comes to incorporating humor into these rather serious stories. I found myself laughing at many lines, and everybody, including the NPCs, had so much character. Every time I entered a new area, I made sure to speak to everyone. I finished the game in 40 hours with Hero at level 99, and there's probably only one or two things I dislike about the game. One, the world map is super cramped, and no map makes it really difficult to traverse or even remember where locations are. And two, having an airship that flies over mountains would have made this a million times better. I fully expected the party's ship to fly at a certain point, but unfortunately it doesn't, it just goes over water. Other than that, this is a beautiful game with tons of life lessons, funny moments, memorable scenes, and overall it's a good time. I've had my fill of Lunar 1 on SEGA CD, but Lunar 2 was so good, I honestly want to go back and try Lunar 1 on Game Boy Advance, PlayStation, and PSP. Hell, I'll even try Lunar Walking School on the Game Gear. Yup, I'm hooked on this series now. Adventure awaits in this amazing JRPG. I have to say, given it was released in 1995, shortly after gaming outlets had announced the SEGA CD's death, Lunar Eternal Blue is a true swan song for the SEGA CD. I assume the PlayStation version is better in a lot of ways, same with Lunar 1. However, if you want to play the original on SEGA CD, you can't go wrong because it is truly a legendary JRPG. Maybe someday I'll play the PlayStation version of Lunar 2 and release an analysis of it on the channel. Let me know if you'd like to see that. This list has taken quite a while. I hope you've been enjoying it. I certainly have. But the last game is going to need a whole video unto itself because it's just that grand. I hope to see you in the next video where we'll talk about one of the greatest games ever made,